Hey there, thanks for stopping by for another edition of our Sky Tonight program. My name is Seth Mayo. I'm the curator of astronomy for the Loma Planetarium at MOAS, and in this edition, we are covering the dates of May 23rd through May 29th. We're going to call this the planetary episode. We're going to focus on all those planets again in the early morning. We're first going to see the moon pass by some of them and get fairly close. Then we're going to talk about the beautiful conjunction between Jupiter and Mars as they get really close to each other by the end of the month. And then we'll do a cool feature as we fly by each planet, talking about what makes them special and interesting. So let's get to it. As we head to the early morning sky looking towards the east just before sunrise, this is where you can find those planets if you haven't seen them already. And I realize getting up early sometimes for some folks may be a little difficult, but if you do have a chance to get out there sometime this week, especially by the end of the week, there's some really great things to see. Even if you're out for just a moment, it's worth your time. So this is Tuesday morning, and by the early part of the week, we're actually going to see the moon pass by some of these planets. And just as a reminder, planets look like stars that don't twinkle. Here in Stellarium, we can actually see them as these very bright, star-like looking objects in the sky. So we have Venus down here nearest the east. That is the brightest of all four. Then we have Jupiter, the second brightest planet in the sky. Mars is a decent amount dimmer than Jupiter, but still there and glowing a little bit red. Then we have, of course, the Crescent Moon and Saturn way up here. So again, this is Tuesday morning, May 24th, the morning after this episode airs, and that's where you're going to find the waning Crescent Moon. This is one of my favorite phases of the moon, not too far from Mars and Jupiter, so that's kind of a nice grouping there. Let's move ahead to Wednesday morning, the 25th. If you get there, the moon is still nearby, about 5 degrees east of Jupiter here, and an even thinner crescent. So that's a really nice grouping, maybe a really nice photographic opportunity. It's always worth seeing the moon next to some planets in the sky. And then we'll continue on as we watch the moon wane even more. So we'll go to an even thinner crescent by Thursday morning, the 26th. And then by Friday morning, the 27th, you'll see a very thin crescent near the planet Venus, very close to the eastern horizon there. And as we continue on through the end of the month here, 28th and 29th, the moon will fall into the glare of the sun, and actually by the 30th, that is a new moon when the far side of the moon is being lit by our sun, and we can't see it, of course, from Earth. So the moon crossing by those planets is quite nice. Now, as we reverse the time back to earlier in the week where we started, instead of looking at the moon, let's pay attention to what Mars and Jupiter are doing in relation to each other. So let's move ahead again from Tuesday morning to Wednesday, and you'll notice those two planets right here above the moon are getting closer and closer each morning. We'll continue on here as we get to the 26th, 27th, and what's happening is actually Mars is moving faster in its orbit and kind of catching up to Jupiter in the sky here. We'll continue on to the 28th, and that's when those two planets you notice are really close. This is where this conjunction really starts to tighten up. Conjunction is when two or more celestial objects get close in the sky, and particularly interesting when you see planets like this. So you'll find Jupiter to the left, at least from this point of view, and Mars to the right. They're going to be different brightnesses and different colors. Jupiter should be much brighter. It's a much bigger planet than Mars, which is much smaller and has that kind of reddish glow to it. So you will know the difference for sure. And then we're going to go to the 29th. This is Sunday morning, and that's when the conjunction it's at its closest. This is really nice. This is when these two planets get within 0.58 degrees. To be more specific, that's about 34.8 arc minutes across. That is a little over the width of a full moon, so that's a very close conjunction. So close, in fact, that if you have a telescope and you point it there, you can see them in one field of view. So let's zoom in on that area here in Stellarium and get a better view of this. This is always cool to do, and a more telescopic view of what you might be able to see in, again, one field of view. And we can see those two planets side by side. So again, you got Jupiter there at the top, and you can even see some of its moons, which is always really nice, no matter if it's a conjunction or not. And there is Mars. Now keep in mind, they are very different distances away from us. On this morning, Jupiter is about 494 million miles away, and Mars is about 137 million miles away. So they are pretty far from each other and from us. And even though that Mars is closer, Mars is only half the size of Earth and not the most reflective planet. It has that very brownish red color where its albedo is not as high as maybe like Jupiter. Jupiter is much larger than Earth and has a much more reflective atmosphere. So it makes it shine very bright, usually as the second brightest planet in the sky. Sometimes Mars gets brighter than Jupiter, but that's when Mars is really close to us, near opposition. And like I said, the separation between the two is about 0.58 degrees, so you could fit about the width of a full moon, just a little bit over the width of a full moon in this area, so that's still pretty close. And most telescope eyepieces, you would see this in one field of view. Now, on this morning, something else is interesting happening with Jupiter. If you pay close attention to it, maybe even magnify a little bit more, we'll find those moons here. And what we have here, and we can kind of click on each one, this is the moon called Europa, one of those Galilean moons, the 4 Galilean moon. That's that very icy moon with a liquid ocean underneath. Then we have Ganymede right here, and also visible possibly way over here to the right is Callisto right here. But going back to Ganymede, the largest moon in the solar system, what's really great is it's casting a shadow on Jupiter, and this is called a transit. So along with the conjunction of Jupiter and Mars, we also have a transit going on here. And here on the East Coast, the transit will start more on this western limb of Jupiter here. If you're more to the western side, especially the United States, you actually see the transit start kind of more to the middle of Jupiter and a little bit farther in. It just depends on the time. Transits are more specific to your location. So that's going to be cool to see the shadow of Ganymede, the solar system's largest moon, cross Jupiter. So you may notice that as well if you have enough magnification with a telescope, if you're looking in this area during this amazing Mars and Jupiter conjunction. So a lot going on there in that part of the sky, especially on the 29th, and even on a day before on the 28th or a day after on the 30th, they're still going to be close as well. The 28th, you see them there. There's the 29th again, and then the 30th, you still see them close. So you have some days around the 29th to check out this conjunction, just in case your weather is not working out or you don't have a chance to see it on that morning. And keep in mind, while you're looking at this conjunction, it's probably best to see it between about 4 and maybe 5:30 in the morning. If you get past 6, the light from the rising sun may obscure your view. So at that early time frame is when you want to check out the conjunction going on by the end of this month. As we witness all these naked eye planets in the early morning, let's take some time to fly them and see what makes them tick and what makes them interesting. And they're all fascinating in different ways. So we're going to head to the planet nearest the eastern horizon in the morning, and that's the planet Venus. And that is the brightest out of all of them you can see in the sky. Venus shines so very brilliantly, like we've mentioned in the past. And so we're going to fly right to it. And as we head there, of course, Venus is the second planet from our sun, one of those inferior planets to us. That means it's inside of Earth's orbit. And its movement is quite interesting because it orbits around the sun every 224 days, but the rotation of the planet is much slower at about 243 days. So it actually goes around the sun one time before one Venusian day occurs, which makes it quite interesting. If you're on the planet, you could actually walk faster than the rotation of it, which means if the sun is sitting in the sky, if you could see it from the surface of Venus, you could keep that sun in the same place in the sky if you walked in the right direction. The problem is, Venus is covered in a thick smog of carbon dioxide. That is what makes Venus so bright from Earth. That reflects a lot of light from the sun. Its albedo, or its reflectivity, is very high. And since Venus comes close to Earth, it makes it a very bright planet. But that atmosphere creates a very noxious and scary environment. I always joke that if you're planning a solar system vacation, Venus may not be one of your first choices just because of how extreme the environment is. That carbon dioxide traps the heat, it's that greenhouse effect, raising temperatures up to 850, even 900 degrees Fahrenheit. That is hot enough to melt lead. That is so very hot. And that atmosphere, being so thick, weighs down on you. If you're on the surface, the pressure of the atmosphere is like 90 times that of Earth's atmosphere. On the surface, that's like going half a mile below our ocean in pressure. So the atmosphere would crush you along with that very simmering heat, And not to mention, in some levels of the atmosphere, the clouds are made of sulfuric material. So there's actually sulfuric acid raining down. So it's always been this mind-boggling, scary place, but fascinating. If you can peer through the clouds, which we did back in the 90s with a spacecraft called Magellan that gave us radar images, we find a planet scarred and etched by ancient lava flow. We think all that carbon dioxide came from volcanic eruptions spewing sulfur compounds and carbon dioxide into that atmosphere. And there was even some speculation that maybe the atmosphere could have life floating in it in the upper levels where the temperature is a little bit nicer and the pressure is not so high, but we're not entirely sure if that's the case. But that's why there was renewed interest in Venus, with NASA sending a probe around the planet, maybe even lander down on the surface, and other missions, maybe even balloon-type missions that float in the atmosphere of Venus. So even though this planet can be such a scary place, it is so beautiful as seen from Earth and fascinating in many ways. So as we move away from Venus here, let's head a little higher in the sky where we can see the conjunction between Jupiter and Mars. So let's head over to Mars, the fourth planet from our sun and the planet that sits just outside of Earth's orbit. So you would call this a superior planet in terms of orbits. So as we get to Mars here, Mars is this fascinating world we've always been interested. It's another one of our neighbors that is the most similar to Earth out of all the planets, at least right now in the solar system. Mars kind of has the opposite problem to Venus. It is a cold and dry desert planet. Instead of covered in a thick cloud of carbon dioxide, it has a very thin atmosphere of carbon dioxide. It's about 1% the density of our atmosphere, not allowing it to have really a significant greenhouse effect. Most of the heat that enters Mars is lost back into space. But long ago, we believe Mars was this planet that was covered in water, and that makes it really interesting. Possibly 20% of the planet was covered in water. On the northern hemisphere of Mars, there was a pretty large ocean, and for comparison, at least for ratio to the ocean to the size of the planet, it's about the same ratio between the Atlantic Ocean and Earth to the size of our own planet. So it's a pretty big ocean that existed there on Mars, and if there was water, maybe there is life. But Mars died as a planet. Its dynamo, which is its internal mechanism that creates its magnetic field, died. And once that magnetic field diminished, its atmosphere could be eroded by the sun and its solar wind. And over time, the pressure of the planet lowered and the surface of Mars was more irradiated by the sun. Some of that water could have been evaporated into space and broken up into oxygen and hydrogen. A lot of that hydrogen gets swept away into space. But we actually think a lot of the water was probably absorbed into the planet or actually absorbed into the rock. We think actually most of it is there, but it's pretty hard to obtain that water nowadays. Mars is about half the size of Earth, but really big features. Has the largest volcano or mountain in the solar system, an extinct volcano called Olympus Mons. That is the area of Arizona in size and about 3 times taller than Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, and has the largest canyon in the solar system, Valles Marineris, that would stretch across the entire United States. So fascinating planet. Of course, we talked about it with the Perseverance rover there. We have rovers there, drone helicopter there now, spacecraft flying around it, and we hope to send people to this planet at some point. And then moving out from Mars, let's just head right over to Jupiter, a bit farther away, close to 500 million miles away right now. And getting to Jupiter, this is a massive system. As we know, Jupiter is the largest planet in the solar system, about 10 or 11 times the size of Earth. So you could fit about 10 or 11 Earths across the face of the planet. And the mass is truly impressive. Jupiter is 318 times the mass of Earth. So if you actually took all the other planets in the solar system, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and combine them into one large planet, Jupiter would still be 2.5 times more massive. It's that big. And it's a gas planet, so it's mostly made of hydrogen and helium. As we fly over those clouds, you can see the different bands. They actually travel in different directions. Now, Jupiter has an interesting spin. It spins very fast. It's the fastest rotating planet in the solar system, only taking 10 of our hours to rotate once. And for such a large planet, that is a fast rotation. But Jupiter takes about 12 years to go around the sun. That is one Jovian year for Jupiter, so quite a journey around. And it's a planet we're learning more about with its clouds and the internal mechanism inside. If there's a solid core, we're still determining that. and there's a spacecraft Juno that's been flying around Jupiter lately over the past 5 or 6 years, helping us understand this planet and its internal workings a little bit more. And as we fly away from Jupiter, those moons are always fascinating. Of course, we saw them earlier, especially even the transit of one of the moons across the cloudy bands. The 4 largest moons, the Galilean moons, Europa, Ganymede, Io, and Callisto, orbit closer in and are very large, really interesting moons. And farther out, we can find 76 more moons. So in total, there are 80 moons discovered around Jupiter so far. There might be more, but that's how many we've discovered up until this date. Now, moving away from Jupiter, we got one more planet to feature here in the sky, and that's a planet a bit farther away from all these others, a little higher up once the morning arrives, if you get up. And we're gonna find Saturn here. Saturn is pretty far away from us, about 894 million miles away from Earth at the moment. This is the 6th planet from the Sun. Takes a whopping 30 years to go around the Sun one time. The farther out you go, the longer it takes to go around the Sun. And Saturn is another fast rotating planet with a more than 10-hour rotational period. These gas planets spin quite fast. And Saturn has more of this kind of milky homogeneous appearance. It is similar to Jupiter in composition, mostly made of hydrogen and helium, about 9 to 10 times bigger than Earth, so also very large, but definitely not nearly as massive as Jupiter, at about 95 times the mass of Earth. It's actually considered the least densest planet in the solar system. If you had a giant tub of water and you put Saturn in it, it would actually float in the water. It's less dense than water, the entire planet. So it has a very tenuous atmosphere, but definitely really beautiful, pretty reflective planet. It's so far away from us, it can't get as bright as Jupiter, but if it was the same distance as Jupiter, it would shine brighter because of that high albedo atmosphere. Now, of course, Saturn is so popular and famous for that amazing ring system. All the gas planets have rings, but Saturn has the very best. And those rings orbit around the planets. There are different rings that are lettered with different widths. And as we look at them from afar, they may look like pieces kind of connected together. But at closer inspection, if you can fly into them, the rings are actually made up of individual components of ice and rock. And much of this ice is very, very reflective, reflecting a lot of light from the sun back to us, even when it's 800 to 900 million miles away. And the rings are really thin. In some areas, only 30 feet thick, but they're so reflective, they're noticeable at the great distance and really, really beautiful. Sometimes you see gaps in them, and those gaps can be created by the moons sweeping away material inside the rings. And the rings may be composed of a moon or a large celestial body that got too close to Saturn, and Saturn's gravity ripped it apart due to tidal forces. And that ripped apart moon or object was strewn about Saturn, creating the ring system. The rings won't always last, though. We think they'll disappear in about 300 million years. So it's amazing that we have a chance to see the rings in our lifetime. And the moon system around Saturn is quite extensive as well. Saturn has the most confirmed moons in the solar system, with a current count of 82 discovered so far. There might be more as well. And has one really interesting moon called Titan, that's the 2nd largest in the solar system, and the only moon with a significant atmosphere. It's an atmosphere thick with nitrogen. It's a very cold moon with lakes of methane and ethane on the surface. And there is a mission being developed called Dragonfly to send a drone helicopter to Saturn sometime in the 2030s to fly around the moon of Titan. So another fascinating planet we can find in the sky as well. They each offer something interesting that tells us the kinds of planets that can exist in the solar system and beyond. So when you see these non-twinkling looking dots in the sky, think about each planet individually and how interesting those worlds are on their own. Hey, you made it for another edition of our Sky Tonight program. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you find yourself in Daytona Beach, please stop by the Museum of Arts and Sciences. You got to check out all the exhibits we have on display, and of course, a show in our Loman Planetarium that we run daily. If you want any more information about our programs, our events, our exhibit schedules, please check our website online and tune into our various social media channels. We're producing some amazing content from the museum and of course about space and astronomy. So we love to see you back here again. Thank you very much. Take care, and of course, happy stargazing.